Hello there, welcome to the channel. Acolyte finale is in a couple of days, and so I went back and had a look at this interview about episode 7 on nerdist.com. You should check it out. It's a really good read about the show, and we're just going to go through it and hit some of the points in this episode and in this interview. So it's cool they talk about vergences in the Force, which is really cool. That was not something that I thought would be talked about in depth in a live action show. If you don't know what a vergence is, think the cave on Dagobah that Luke goes into, think of like the mirror dimension thing on Ahch-To in The Last Jedi, that kind of stuff there. There's a lot of good information in this article as well, like this question: vergence can hide Force-sensitive people. Is that the reason that the Coven chose the planet? I asked because I want to know what came first. They found the planet, then moved there, and they decided to create the girls, or they moved to Brendok specifically to create the girls. And Headland responded, it's a good question, it's also backwards because we haven't confirmed that the witches created them, but they do basically say yes. They hit about the nature of the particular vergence on Brendok, and I saw a lot of people on TikTok saying that the twins themselves were the vergence in the Force, and like, why couldn't they just go with the blood samples and be like, hey, look at this vergence in the Force, but the twins aren't the vergence in the Force. I think a lot of people mistook that. She says, this was very important to me, Dave Filoni and Pablo Hidalgo, that the girls are not a vergence. The girls themselves are not a vergence in the Force. They needed, again, however they got here, the act of creating them was going to need amplification, thus the vergence. Therefore, we came around to the decision that the vergence was on Brendok and that it would remain mysterious. So that way, if we went back there in future tellings of the story, we could uncover a little bit more about what is actually there. So I think that's actually very important, that people know that distinction, that the girls themselves are not the vergence in the Force. I also liked this one. This is not my question. Souls, the twins, where did they come from? How were they created? Tune in next week. We definitely aren't going to leave you hanging. You do a show like this, you take a lot of risks. You don't really save a lot of those types of questions for a season 2. There are a lot of things you do save for a season 2, but that kind of question is not one of them. So we're definitely getting the full reveal of what happened next week, which is good to know, because I am still concerned about how much there is to go through in just one episode. They go on to talk about the Night Sisters and how inspired they were by the Night Sisters, and that you could do this sort of thing in Star Wars, and how the Night Sisters are very different from the Witch Coven on Brendok. The Night Sisters utilize magic exclusively. With my witches, it's a bit of a hybrid. They're definitely dabbling in the Force and calling the Force by a different name, but they're trying to cultivate their sensitivity to it without having been trained by a Jedi. Is that even possible? And the Ascension ceremony utilizing not just the Vergence, but the Eclipse. I also really liked this part, which was going into this episode, the show definitely suggested that the Jedi might have done something truly terrible on Brendok, but I think this showed that their actions were either genuinely noble, totally defensible, or at least understandable mistakes, and I think that is something that's very, very true. The Jedi are not being portrayed as bad. The show is not saying, hey, the Jedi are the bad guys. It's showing that the Jedi don't always get it right, and I think that's a big distinction that a lot of people are getting wrong. Like, it is not villainizing the entire Jedi Order. It's showing that the Jedi are human, so to speak. Obviously there's other species, but that they make mistakes. They don't always get it right, and I think that is a very important thing in not just this show, but in all of Star Wars. The Jedi aren't perfect. They're not infallible. They're not always going to make the correct decision. They also talk about how Sol and Osha had this connection and mirrors that to Qui-Gon and Anakin in The Phantom Menace. And then I like this part in particular. I'm glad you brought up Qui-Gon because I wanted to ask about Anakin. I think the connections between the twins and Anakin were obvious even before this episode. I want to focus on their differences, specifically this idea that their consciousness split into two bodies. Why would that make them stronger, aka the power of two, and not weaker if they're two halves of one whole? Headland said, I think it's both. The girls are guinea pigs. They're patient zero for this sort of power. It didn't work perfectly, therefore the girls on their own can never be as powerful as Anakin. Their full potential together has yet to be explored. They've been separated for too long. It's like when you're doing an experiment and it's the first round of it. They are maybe not the first, but one of the first experiments of this particular use of power. So the twins are weaker than Anakin for sure. They are going to fall short of what will eventually become the Chosen One. They will never achieve what that is, because in my mind, Anastasia could only do so much. She's not powerful enough to create one person. It also goes into how Anastasia feels about the twins, and like knowing that one wants to move on and become a Jedi and one wants to stay with the Coven, and that she has to let them make their own decisions. She can't force them into being something that they're not, which I think is very important. And she also confirms that when Indara severs that connection of the witches to Kelnaka, that it did kill them. She didn't know that that's what was going to happen, but it was, like I said, being unplugged from the Matrix while you're still connected, and it just drops them like a sack of potatoes. And I like that this episode just reinforces, again, the Jedi aren't perfect. There was a series of mistakes made from both sides here, you know. Finding out how these people were created, we're going to find out next week exactly, but hiding them from the Jedi going in and saying, hey, we have the right to test these people, and sort of overstepping their own bounds on there. You know, Torben being so young and eager to get out of there that he instigates this whole thing, which then riddles him with guilt because he's got like 50 dead witches on his hands now. I also like this part in particular. Coral says she would die before she let the Jedi take her children, then the Jedi take Osha, so is it okay to assume she's dead? Because the episode definitely suggested that she survived. Headland, yeah, no body, no death. That's all I'll say about that one. So I believe that Coral is still alive. I don't believe Coral is going to come back in the finale. I'm not sure. I'm wondering if Chimera found May on Brendok, if Coral came back for May, because the whole disapparating thing, or like dematerializing thing, wasn't an attack apparently. They talk about this later on in here. She does say, actually, sorry, that Coral and Chimera do not know each other. They have not interacted, and she does say that her species will tell you a little bit more about where she ends up, so I would say that Coral, being a Zabrak, is going to be headed for Dathomir at some point. But back to this part. When May asks for help, Anastasia not only starts dematerializing her own body, she makes May turn into a shadow as well. What can you tell us about what exactly is happening there and why? Because I got this confused. I thought that that was going for like the possession thing, but that's not what was happening. And Headland says here, Anastasia's main concern is that violence will be used in this confrontation. We talked about this meaning two things. One, that Anastasia must have come from some place that utilized violence. It's something that she would have seen when she was a child, something that she would have endured in her coming of age. So the main concern is obviously the safety of her children, the physical safety of them. The second concern is I don't want my children or my legacy to be affected by something violent. I want to remove them from whatever that is. That's why about the dematerializing is the first thing that Jodie and I talked about in seeding the character. What is she doing? What she is doing is what Jecki says in episode 4, that it's an honor to see anyone transform into the Force. I believe Anastasia is transforming herself and May into the Force in a way that doesn't kill them. And this is something that Sol mistook and took as a threat, or even as her harming the kids to get them out of there, and that is where Sol fucks up. I also like this part, back just to misunderstanding, with May talking about walking through fear and everyone being sacrificed to fulfill their destiny. Was Sol correct that the girls are in danger? No, May misremembered what her mother said. Sol misinterpreted it because the child did. He was believing what the child said and genuinely thought, well, she says sacrifice, so this is bad, but she got it wrong. May got it wrong when she said sacrifice a part of yourself, and not everyone has to be sacrificed to fulfill their destiny. Honestly, I recommend reading this whole article. There's a lot of great bits in here. There's another good bit towards the end. Will we learn whether Chimera is truly a Sith or not in the season finale? And the response was, what I will say is you don't hear it from his mouth, but there are a couple of small things that will answer that question. That's interesting, because when I watched that episode 5, I was just like, oh cool, he's a Sith. They did confirm it. And then other people said to me, it's like, well, technically he didn't say he was a Sith, he said you would call me a Sith. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're actually right. I didn't even really think about that at first. So he might not be a Sith. Others view him as a Sith, but we're not going to get a solid answer from him, so we're going to see what happens as this goes on. The next question, though, is the one that I was talking about. Will we learn if Chimera has any connection to the Knights of Ren? Takes a long pause. It's a really good theory. What an interesting theory. What an amazing... That's... Wow. So, I really like that response, as if... yeah, it definitely could be something. I did a whole video on whether or not Chimera would be connected to the Knights of Ren, because that music playing was not an accident, so I'd be interested to see what's going to happen with that. And again, this just loops back around into I am concerned that there's not enough room in one episode left of this show to fit all this stuff in. But if we skip down to the end of the article, this one's for me. I've been waiting many years for Darth Plagueis to show up. Do you know how the whole story of the galaxy far, far away from the Acolyte to him training Palpatine connects? She says, yes, I do. If I get to continue this story, I know how I would like that to play out. And I would say I think it's pretty complicated and messy. So I'm pretty sure we're not getting Plagueis showing up in the finale. But we could get Tenebrous. You never know. We could get Tenebrous showing up. I don't think we will, but it's possible. I don't know. because there's just so much to go through in this last episode, and there's almost too much. So let's just go through this list, okay? Is Mother Coral alive? I believe yes. I don't know if she's going to appear in the last episode, though. Will there be a Knights of Ren connection? I don't think it will be explicit. Like, I don't think Chimera will be like, hey, this is my new order, the Knights of Ren. Do I think Chimera is a former Jedi? Yes. Do I think his scar was given to him by Vernestra? Maybe. Do I think that Chimera was maybe an apprentice of Tenebris? Yes, I think. Because we've got to remember, I know the Plagueis novel is not canon, but if we use it as a bit of a framework for that time period, because they can always bring stuff into canon, Tenebris had multiple apprentices. We know that. We know that he had Plagueis, but we also know he had Venemus and other potential prospects in that. And we know that he kept them separate from each other. So, could Chimera have been one of these really early apprentices of Tenebris, or even Tenebris's master? Because I can't remember exactly how the timeline lines up. It might be too early for that, I'm not sure. But let's just say that Chimera is an apprentice of Tenebris, and he was discarded, and then was like, hey, I'm gonna go make my own thing, you know? So yeah. Other prediction, Sol will be killed by Osha once she learns that Sol killed Anasea. Because I think a lot of people predicted this from the start, that May and Osha would flip. That Osha would turn bad and May would come back towards the light. I think that's very likely, given the information we saw in episode 7, and when we find out that Sol chose to save Osha and not May. I feel like Osha will not react well to that. Vernestra, I have no idea how she's fitting into this finale. I imagine, I don't know if she's involved in this story as much as I think she might be, or if she's more of the connection back to the council and that. I do feel like we'll get Ki-Adi-Mundi appearing again. But yeah, I think the finale will take place on Brendok. I'm pretty sure we haven't seen, there's a scene from the trailer where there's like the two ships like going through like nearly an asteroid belt. I feel like that hasn't happened yet, and that will be them chasing and maybe heading back to Brendok, maybe somewhere else. I saw a good theory online that Coral has been influencing May in her like dark shadowy form, and that is why that her motivation has been changing so quickly, because she's been corrupted by Coral. It's an interesting theory. I don't think it's correct. It's a fun one, but because Headland said that Chimera and Coral don't know each other, I don't know. There's a lot going on. I've already talked about that. Another thing I wanted to ask is, do you think that, say Tenebris does show up, all right? Say Darth Tenebris does show up. I don't think he will, but just bear with me for a second. Would he be a Bith? Because I don't know. I don't know if a Bith would work in live action as a Sith Lord. Just because it would be kind of goofy. And through no fault of its own. You know, I just feel like if you had a Bith show up, and he's this Sith Lord, honestly, you've got that right there. There's the joke. A Sith Bith. A Bith Sith. You know, it's just, it doesn't roll off the tongue very well. But also, I feel like to most casual audience members, they're going to see Tenebris show up, and he's a Bith, and their mind is just going to go right back to episode 4, to the cantina, and Figrin Dan and the modal nodes going, and they're not going to be able to take it seriously. And I agree, in a way. I don't want them to change it, but I think changing it might be for the best, because just that visual of a Bith is so ingrained into that cantina song that I don't know if anyone's going to be able to take it seriously. I don't even think it's going to happen. I don't even think he's going to show up. But if he does, I would not be upset if they changed him from being a Bith. Same with Venemus. Or like maybe you could make Venemus a Sith, a Bith, sorry. But I don't know. I just don't know if a Bith Sith can work in live action. I just feel like it might be too goofy, and I wouldn't be upset if they changed it. I would like it if Plagueis remained a Mun, but again, I'm not sure. Finally, I want to know if we're going to get confirmation that the island that Chimera and Osha are currently on is Baldemnik. I've talked about that in another video as well. Go check out this article on Nerdist, because it's a very good article, and there's a lot of cool questions in there. I got some answers that I didn't know about. Go check out this article. It's a very fun read. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and I'm looking forward to this finale, but I have major concerns about just with the run times of these episodes, if they can bring this to a satisfying conclusion. I hope that they can, but I am nervous about them being able to really pull it off, because like even in this article and some of the things they talk about, sometimes I'm just like, oh, that didn't really come across. Like the way where she talks about how Anastasia turning into that shadow and wanting to get them away, it's like that didn't really come across as that's what was happening. So yeah. Anyway, check out the article. It's a good read. You get a lot of interesting information in it, and yeah, I'm very excited for this finale. Hope they can stick the landing, and honestly, hope it gets a season 2, because I've really enjoyed this show. I think it's been a massive breath of fresh air into the franchise, and I've really enjoyed it. Anyway, that will do it for me. This has been a lot of yapping. Sorry about that, and it's been kind of all over the place, but yeah. Anyway, I'll be back next week to talk about the finale of The Acolyte and to see what answers we get. If you like this, you like talking about Star Wars, make sure you follow me here. And yeah, may the Force be with you. Always.